everyone. Thank you. I always forget to kick off the recording. Okay. We're going to pack this event full of as much information as possible. I know many of you are starting on-cycle recruiting. Others of you are probably preparing. So we're here. We're excited to share our insights. We have an amazing panel. Make sure we'll talk more about the bootcamp later, and I'll get your questions answered. I know a number of you have already registered for the bootcamp, but we are giving out a free spot tonight. So if you go to this link, you can enter for that free spot, and then we'll announce that person at the end. If you sign up, we'll also text you a code that gives you $1,000 off tonight. It's an additional $200 off early bird pricing, which ends in like a few days. So if you do buy and you win, we'll refund you. But definitely make sure you take advantage of that. We're really excited about this bootcamp. It's going to be great. This is the Breaking into Private Equity event. We do a number of these. If you haven't signed up for Leland yet, make sure you do that. We do a bunch, we do these events all the time. A number of these coaches have hosted events in the past. So tons of free stuff, resources, and, lots of, and in the recordings as well. So we will send out this recording, but make sure you sign up in order to get access to that. Erica is going to be dropping links in the chat, and we'll make sure we get as many of your questions answered as we can. We do have a packed lineup of questions and things we want to cover. So, ask questions in the chat, sign up, be respectful and supportive. This is stressful and exciting, and all of those things. We're going to spend just a quick couple of minutes on just introductions, and then we're going to jump into kind of an overview of PE recruiting, and the bulk of the time will be spent on the panel. My name is John. I'm the CEO of Leland. I've been building this company for 3 years. I did one internship in private equity in college. I bought like 10 nice shirts, and now I wear t-shirts to work. So I know a little bit about private equity, but nothing like our panelists. So I'm excited to learn from them. You'll also see Erica and Amelia in the chat sending out emails and other things. And I would love to let our panelists introduce themselves. We have just an amazing lineup tonight. So we'll start with you, Sulekha, and then go to Emma and then Nick.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sulekha, and I'm now based in Los Angeles, but it's hard to believe I graduated college close to 10 years ago. I was class of 2016, started my career out in New York at Goldman Sachs on the consumer retail and healthcare team, spent 2 years there to the day, and then moved to KKR, where I spent 3 years on the investing team, largely focused on healthcare, which is a pretty unique group because I did both large-scale buyout, but also did smaller minority investing through our growth fund. And so got kind of the full spectrum of private market investing. So happy to talk about different stages and how that might be relevant to your search. After that, I did the tried and true path, went to business school, graduated from Stanford Business School about a year ago, and decided to actually join my family's business, which is bootstrapped to date, but we're actually now thinking about bringing on private equity. So life does come full circle, but excited to be on the panel here today.
Awesome. Hi, guys. Nice to meet you. And if you hear any background noise, please excuse that. I'm at the airport. But my name is Emma. I began my career at Citi. I was in the consumer and retail group in 2016 through 2018. And when I was at Citi, I knew pretty quickly that I wanted to move to PE. I had a very targeted approach because my true interest really was always consumer. So I had kind of a short list of a few firms, and I went to L Catterton in their buyout funds. I joined after my second year of banking on cycle. While I was at L Cat, I worked on deals like Cholula, FYI Doctors, and Honest Company, which is Jessica Alba's baby and beauty business. I was actually supposed to go to HBS in 2020, but I opted to defer due to COVID. And I spent 2 years at Vital Farms getting some ops and finance experience there. So super happy to be here with you guys, and best of luck.
Hey, everyone. I'm Nick Larson. I likewise started banking in 2016. I was at Goldman Sachs in San Francisco in their TMT group. After my 2 years there, I joined Francisco Partners, where I was for most of the last 6 years, and as both an associate and VP, and then left earlier this year, and am slowly trying to convert into a t-shirt kind of guy. I joined tech just this last week on Carta's strategy and corp dev team. So if folks are interested in learning more about that transition as well. Always open to chat about that. But I've been coaching on the platform for the last few months. I have experience in interviewing and making hiring decisions across associates and VPs in private equity. So excited to get to meet all of you.
It's great. Thank you all. As you can see, this is a stacked lineup. Super excited to dive in. Would love to also hear from you in the chat. We talk at you a lot during this event, but it's really nice to hear where you dialing in from. We always get people from all over the world. It's just fun. And where are you working or studying if you're still in school? Feel free to drop that in the chat. North Carolina, NYC, New Zealand. I think that, we got New Zealand. We have Kyiv, Ukraine. Awesome. Well, we'll let these continue to trickle in. Pretty awesome all over the world. Welcome. And I know it's late for many of you or early in the morning. So it's awesome to see so many of you. Just a quick introduction on Leland. I know many of you have worked with coaches on Leland already, but we do a number of these things. So I figured we'd just give you a quick introduction. Leland is building the platform that helps you reach your most competitive goals, whether that's breaking into private equity or getting into school. We do that through connecting you with amazing people like the folks on this panel who can do one-on-one coaching and kind of help tailor your experience and their experience to make sure you land the job or get into school. We also do cohort-based courses or boot camps, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and have an amazing curriculum we've built out there. In addition to that, you also get a coaching session. So it kind of is all lumped together. And then we do tons of these free community events. It's working. We help tens of thousands of folks break into different schools and companies every single year. Folks from, as you can see, all around the world use coaches on Leland, and we have about 1,000 coaches on the platform across different categories. So we hope that we can be a part of your journey, and even if it's just for events here or there, we're here for you and are rooting for your success. So that is the quick overview of Leland. And I'll talk a little bit more about the bootcamp a little bit later as well. Okay, with that, Nick, I'm going to kick it over to you to do kind of a quick overview of PE recruiting, and then we'll jump into the panel.
Yeah, just really quick. Private equity recruiting is a very unique beast in the way you need to go about it and the way it's structured. It is one of the few industries that almost runs exclusively through headhunters. So headhunters, build relationships with the private equity firms, and then they're kind of the first line of defense in screening and identifying candidates, which they will then push on to the firms. Essentially, if you want a job in private equity, you need to go through headhunters. You need to build relationships with them, meet with them, and they'll run you through kind of high-level interviews, screen you, and eventually push you on to meet with firms, which are done generally through these kind of informal coffee chats. It's kind of a misnomer. I don't think anyone ever gets coffee during these coffee chats, and most of them are handled over the phone or on Zoom. But once you meet with headhunters, you can kind of dual process, both going through your own connections within firms to have these informal coffee chats, informational interviews, and then as recruiting typically comes close to actually kicking off, whether that's on cycle or off cycle, the headhunters will actually push you towards these coffee chats as well. And that's the way to kind of informally, they're screening you and seeing if you're a good fit for their firm. You can jump to the next slide here. And so there's kind of two phases, but it's really kind of just one very long phase of interviewing timelines for private equity. As some of you may be aware, what is typically called on-cycle recruiting generally happens now about 2 years ahead of the start date. So for start dates for associates in 2026, this happened starting last night. There was some flurry of activity last week where folks were getting called in for coffee chats. Felt like people were kind of picking up steam and getting introduced to firms. And then once, one or two firms kind of feel like they've met enough people where they can bring in enough folks to interview to fill out their class, one of them is going to pull the trigger and it's going to send everyone else into a panic. And then everyone else will start calling people in to interview. So it kind of kicked off probably around 5 p.m. Eastern yesterday. Folks probably were in training, and some people haven't even started training in their banking jobs. got calls and ran and started heading towards offices. I had some clients on Leland who were in offices interviewing until 3 a.m. Eastern last night, which is, yes, absolutely insane. But kind of underscores the need to prep and be ready for that if you're interested in on-cycle. Because on-cycle recruiting's moved up so much, a lot of the opportunities have shifted off-cycle. I'd say probably now it's like 25-75 in terms of total seats. And the firms you see go on-cycle are typically kind of larger mega funds. And most of the kind of middle market, smaller funds will go off-cycle, but there is kind of a mixture throughout that. And off-cycle typically will happen throughout the year, but kind of right now, the majority of those opportunities are coming up in January. So for 2026 summer starts, that'll be January of 2025 or so. And then, as you think about both the timing when you kind of want to recruit and kind of work backwards from there, it's really important to kind of figure out where you want to be, what type of firm you want to be at. There is, a number of different vectors to kind of consider. This kind of discusses four of probably the most important ones, which is what size of fund do you want to be at? Do you want to be at a mega fund, mid-market, lower middle market? What comes with that, sometimes related is kind of investment strategy, right? Do you want to be in kind of large buyout? Do you want to do more growth investing or even earlier stage venture capital type investing? Where do you want to be geographically, right? The bulk of the opportunities are going to be kind of centered in the largest cities, kind of financial centers of the country, most in New York, and then, good amount in San Francisco, LA, Chicago, Boston, and then really any major city across the country is going to have more of those kind of middle market and smaller funds, which can also be great opportunities. And then deciding what industry you want to go into. Do you want to be a generalist or sector specific? This is also tends to be tied to geography a bit as well, right? As you can imagine, San Francisco Bay Area opportunities are generally tied to tech. There's a lot of media that goes on in LA. So, some things to consider there. And I think the most important step here is trying to figure out what you want. And that is one of the things I think I've helped my clients with the most at Leland, is just like, how do you figure out what you want to go do? Because you need to figure out what you want to do in order to make a plan and see which firms, which headhunters you want to focus on, and the timeline that you want to kind of pursue in terms of on-cycle, off-cycle, how to kind of, stack rank. Because if you get into this crazy on-cycle recruiting that just happened yesterday and you don't know exactly what you want, you're going to be put in a situation where you're going to have to make decisions on the fly and oftentimes put yourself in a position that's, not the best for you.
Okay, Nick, that was awesome. Thank you for that crash course. Sulekha, Emma, anything you'd add on that, or should we jump into the panel?
Just like one quick thing I would say is it's kind of to Nick's point, like knowing your strengths is really helpful in terms of deciding where to go and where you best fit. So for me, right, like if I could look at precedents, did this PE firm have people from the city? Did they have people from liberal arts schools? Did they not? Like when you're doing on cycle and you're trying to navigate 10 different interviews at once, it is best to kind of also understand where you fit and where you're the best candidate, just to kind of help you navigate that process. So
that's great. Excellent. Okay, let's jump in. Sulekha, do you mind starting us off with just your own personal recruitment process and kind of some of the learnings that you had going through that?
Yeah, happy to. I knew pretty early on in my banking tenure that I would be recruiting on cycle for private equity. For me, it kicked off MLK weekend of 2017, so January 2017, about 4 months on the desk. And so I did have a little bit of training and experience under my belt. For me, it was pretty obvious early on what industry I wanted to go work in, which was healthcare, because that was my passion. I studied biomedical engineering as an undergrad, and quite frankly, that was also my hook to get into the industry, both in banking and in private equity. And I think what's pretty important early on is figuring out ways to differentiate yourself, because otherwise everyone that early on in your recruiting cycle looks pretty much the same on paper because you don't have a ton of great deal experience. Maybe you went to college with the same college that the PE partner went to. But other than that, it's really hard to differentiate yourself unless you have a hook. So for me, at least, it was the industry hook that really, I think, allowed me to, I actually ended up with 4 offers during the rush recruiting cycle, on-cycle recruiting, which I think is pretty atypical, but that's just because I had spent a lot of time ahead of time kind of planting the seeds and building relationships with folks in the healthcare PE world broadly. And so when on-cycle recruiting did come to bear, I was fortunate enough to get calls to do that process. With that said, once you're in the recruiting, in the rush of it, people will keep you in their offices, literally holding you and preventing you from going and talking to other firms. And so we can talk about that later down the line. But in terms of getting me prepared, I think what maybe others were doing this as well, but it certainly did help differentiate me. I actually had built like a little bit of a mini case of a take private of a healthcare company that I thought would actually make a lot of sense, and sort of what the PE value creation levers would look like if I were to be the one taking the deal, the company private. And so that actually gave me something pretty substantial to talk about during my interviews, even though I didn't necessarily have, I did fortunately have a deal that I had done at Goldman that I could talk about, but it also gave me the opportunity to talk about something more of a hypothetical case, which I think was exciting for the interviewer also to discuss, and it gave us more to talk about than simply what was on my resume, and it allowed them to really kind of test my critical thinking. And so that was certainly something I prepared for, along with going back and doing the mergers and acquisitions guide all over from scratch. Like I had done that through the banking recruiting process, and then I went through it again right before PE recruiting kicked off, because people love to throw in those random accounting questions, those random cash flow questions, the random 3-statement questions. And so if you missing those are like give me questions that will automatically ding you, but if you can kind of ace those, it's certainly a solid foundation to continue on in the process. And so it's a bit about kind of being ahead of the curve, thinking through companies that I think are interesting that could be good take privates, and then also just making sure my technicals on a basic level were solid. And then every now and then I would get the random brain teaser, which quite frankly I was never very good at, but honestly sometimes you just have to give it a good try and have a good attitude, and people will even let you slide if you don't do great on those. So that's a bit about my journey, and fortunately I was able to end up in a spot that I really liked with a few different offers, and we can get to this later on, but I think a lot of the times people feel pressure to take the first offer that they get. I actually waited till my third offer and took that one, which was KKR, because it's a longer story. They weren't really doing on-cycle recruiting. I told them I had offers in hand and I really wanted to go work there, and then somehow that materialized into them jumping on board and interviewing me in a very accelerated fashion. So don't feel too pressured to take the first thing you get, is maybe the last thing I'll say before passing it on to the rest of the panelists.
That's great. Thank you, Sulekha. Super helpful. Emma, maybe we'll go to you. Would love to hear about your recruitment process.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually did not go on cycle until my second year as an analyst. So when I hit the desk at Citi, the most important thing to me was to really build up a good reputation and also just get my feet under me. I had worked in I went to liberal arts college. I didn't know modeling. I was like, I need to just kind of hit the ground running here and get up to speed as fast as possible. So my first year in banking was truly just that. I did a lot of deals. I worked with my associates and I learned as much as I possibly could. And the advice I received in that point in time was not to talk to headhunters until I was really prepared. Nick touched on this, but really every single interaction you have with a headhunter is an interview. In some cases it's extreme. Like I've even heard of headhunters making you do paper LBOs, but the point being that it's okay not to respond to them right away until you're absolutely ready. So for me, I waited until my second year until I decided, okay, I really wanted to go the PE route. I knew I wanted to be New York adjacent. I knew I wanted consumer, and I knew I wanted buyout. So from that point on, I had a list of 3 or 4 firms actually that I was really, really passionate about. In terms of prep, the first thing I would say to do is really get comfortable building models. At least in my experience in banking, a lot of the time your group might use templates, or even if you're not in an as LBO focused in industry, you might not even be comfortable with that. So personally, I started prepping the Street of Walls and Wall Street Oasis models right away, to the point where it's just muscle memory, honestly. Like it is an exercise, you have to ace it. I think the model test, at least at Catterton, and I know other firms, really is a must to check the box. And so to me, it just felt like, why not get kind of the reps of that gating item out and then focus on the rest. That ended up working out really favorably just because we were all surprised when on-cycle kicked off. And so at least I wasn't trying to get some like huge undertaking done that was difficult in such a small period of time. And just to quickly wrap, I guess my other piece of advice is it was very helpful for me to know the 3 or 4 firms I really wanted to work at. So when on-cycle happened, I was at a mega fund actually, and I was locked in a room. And I just figured, you know what, I haven't talked to these guys as much. There's 20 other people here. I know Catterton is top of mind. And I just made the decision, left, and went straight to Catterton and had my offer 2 hours later. So you might be in high pressure situations like that, but even if not, it's just a good idea to kind of force rank your priorities ahead of time so that you're able to make snap decisions that you're comfortable with.
That's great. I'm alarmed at how many people are being held in in offices, but that's great. Nick, do you want to walk us through your process?
Yeah. Some similarities and some differences. So I joined Goldman and knew I didn't want to do banking, but I had no idea what I wanted to do afterwards. And so, some of my earliest conversations, even with headhunters, I was like bringing up hedge funds. I was talking about all sorts of things, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And in talking to people, and I wouldn't recommend that. I feel like, now especially like headhunters, I think are a little more intense, honestly. But try and figure out a little bit more about what you want to do. Don't be so scatterbrained, like I was. But slowly kind of created this list of, I think, 6 things that I was looking for in a firm. From industry, location, whether they promote. I didn't want to go to business school, so I wanted to find a place that internally promoted. Size of fund, size of firm, all those sorts of things. And recruiting happened very quickly. It was like kind of coming up to the holidays, and I had maybe a couple phone screens with a couple firms, but really hadn't had many touch points. And someone from Francisco Partners was like, "Hey, do you want to grab coffee this week?" And I was heading out of town because it was like kind of close to like the end of the year holidays, and I was like, I can't right now, but would love to catch up when I'm back. He said, "Sure, great." And then when I was back, he pinged me and he was like, "Hey, do you want to meet this week?" And then like an hour later, he was like, "Actually, do you want to meet tonight?" And I was like, sure. And so after work, I went in at like 6 p.m. to their offices. I was there of my own free will and choice for an hour, talked with him, and he basically was like, "Hey, what are you doing tomorrow? Come in and interview all day with us." One thing to consider for people, based on your group and your bank or your consulting firm, people are going to be have varying levels of support for you in recruiting. For anyone who's thinking of going to Goldman Sachs or at Goldman Sachs, generally speaking, they're very anti-recruiting. I had some important client meetings the next day. I basically told them, like, I don't think I can get out of these. And they made accommodations. I went in at 6 a.m., did my modeling test, went to work for a few hours, came back and interviewed for another 4 hours, and left that night with an offer. So I only interviewed at one firm. I accepted it immediately. I did not want to put myself through the pain of interviewing at another firm if I didn't have to. And having those kind of few things that I was looking for, it aligned really well with what I was seeing at Francisco Partners. And so ultimately took the offer. So it was a bit of a whirlwind experience for me, but much better than going through days and days of recruiting, which can ultimately happen sometimes. So
that's great. Yeah, a big part of why we wanted to hear your guys' stories is that there's just always going to be differences, and I know these firms try to kind of create some structure, but it does relationships do matter, and so cultivating those early, I think, is a big theme. And of course, being prepared when those relationships come. So let's talk through, like, you touched on this a little bit, and I'll go back to you, Emma, because I know you may have to drop early when your flight comes, but I'd love to hear, like, if you were to articulate key skills. You mentioned modeling, but other things that maybe either technical hard skills and soft skills that you see being common that people are interested in.
Yeah, for sure. So I can speak specifically more to consumer as well. I think every firm is a little bit different, but all these firms expect you to be able to do the work as many hours as they request of you, and kind of be on the top of your game. So that is table stakes. Like, I do think sometimes there's a preconception that PE is maybe better in terms of that than banking, but actually it's the opposite. You have more responsibility as an associate, and therefore you're given more trust. And so at a minimum, just whenever you're interviewing, just make sure you really are conveying that you are someone who is responsible, can do the work, and will do so happily. So that's like kind of the bare minimum, I would say. But then on top of that, at least in my experience, an interesting consumer was a must. This is honestly one of the easier sectors in my point of view, because most of us can have an opinion on consumer and retail without even being investors in it. But for me, that kind of manifested as just having industries I was really following on my own personal interest, kind of ideas of what I thought was investable, what wasn't. And I also think kind of the step deeper that you need to go for PE interviews is understanding the business model of these businesses. So I guess in that case, again, kind of knowing that the margin structure of a grocery retailer is much different than a DTC company and so on, and kind of trying to take it a step further in your thinking. And so what does that mean? What kind of investment is it? What kind of multiple could you pay? What growth would you need to make this work? And just asking yourself those higher level questions, and maybe even partnering with friends or kind of former analysts that have gone on to PE to kind of have those thought exercises with. Because I think in banking, it's very easy to kind of get stuck on reciting your deals and knowing the multiples and kind of the rationale. But if you don't take yourself a step further, you might get kind of stuck on an interview where they're really trying to understand how you, Emma, thinks rather than you, nameless banking analyst.
Yeah, that's great. Sulekha, anything you'd add?
I think in general, what's the biggest difference between banking and PE is that people are actually paying you to have a point of view in PE versus in banking. They're just paying you to be a model monkey a lot of the times, or a PowerPoint person who's just putting together slides. And so I think the faster you can start developing a point of view, and like this is something I still do today just because I love it. Like I'll be walking down the street and I'll see like, oh, Caliber Collision, that's owned by H&F. I wonder what that business is and what they're like, why they decided to invest in it, what was their like value creation structure. And that's just something that I think about constantly when I'm looking at businesses, because it's interesting and it's fun for me. Being in healthcare, what's interesting and what really attracted me to do PE in healthcare is that we actually touch consumer because they're healthcare consumer businesses. We touch software because they're healthcare software businesses. So there's so many different business models that are associated with it. And having that curiosity in general, even when I was interviewing people to join the analyst program at KKR, joining junior associates at KKR, the ability to kind of demonstrate intellectual curiosity, I think, is essential. In addition to, I mean, obviously the table stakes of being a hard worker, showing like kind of the horsepower to get jobs done and to get the work done correctly. That's super important, but also having curiosity, which is kind of hard to learn as a skill, but rather you have to be able to kind of demonstrate in different ways. So are you staying with the times? Like, are you following deals that are getting done? Have you followed the historical deals that a firm has done? And do you have a point of view on those? And so to kind of put it in a package, I think coming with a point of view is super important in this role in general. And so being able to demonstrate that, whether or not the point of view is correct or not, is a different story. It's more of like, do you have the ability to defend your viewpoint and also debate about it? Because ultimately that is what the investing role is. You'll come to the table with an investment opportunity. Some people like it, some people won't, and it's up to you to defend your point of view in front of others. So I think that's a pretty important skill set to have.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
One quick thing I'd add, which kind of goes with what Sulekha was talking about. In banking and consulting, your first years, you're very much like a unit of work. Okay. People in private equity generally care a little bit more about you as a person, generally. And like they want to get to know you, and like they want to work with people who are like genuinely good people and like mesh well with the team. Whereas like I feel like you can get a banking job just being like, yep, I'm just gonna like work as hard as I can and do nothing else. Don't be afraid to like be yourself. I was in interviews with partners and like all they did was talk about like me and my family and like where I was from and all this stuff. And like we barely even touched on like actual work stuff. Like people will care about that kind of stuff. And so just be yourself. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, that's a great addition. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit, and maybe we'll go back to you, Sulekha, for this one. What's like how am I getting in contact with headhunters? How am I thinking about it? Are there like email distros I should be monitoring? Like, how do you recommend people even think about the recruiting process? Yeah.
In terms of like the first step, which is, I think it's a self-discovery process. I'd really encourage everyone to not just fall under the pressure to recruit in PE unless you really kind of want to do it, because it is a lot of work. And what's more challenging is that if you put yourself through the stress of PE recruiting and then you end up with not an offer that you like or without an offer at all, I think you'll be more dejected than if you had kind of asked yourself that question at the very beginning, like, do I even want this? So that's kind of where I'd encourage people to start, because I think all of us can talk about other pathways. I mean, I think Nick and I have both diverged from the investing pathway at this point. And so there are a lot of other bright pathways outside of banking, which I think I'd be happy to share as well with individuals if they're interested, because life doesn't end after PE. So I just wanted to make that upfront and clear. But let's say you are really set on PE because you really love the idea of investing in companies and taking stewardship and ownership of these portfolio companies and helping kind of improve them and, you know, sell them back out to the market after. Truly going through the exercise of like, what are you looking for, and creating a checklist, which I don't think is quite dissimilar from like a dating experience. Honestly, what are you looking for? What are your non-negotiables? Is it geography? Is it fund size? Is it like, do all the partners go home and eat dinner with their families every night? Because there are a lot of firms where that's not the case. And maybe that's just a cultural incongruency right off the bat that's not worth pursuing. So come up with your like bare minimum kind of checklist, what's interesting, what's not, and then shortlist that to find actual firms, and then blind email people to those firms. My recommendation, I mean, Goldman, I would have gotten fired if they had known that I got an offer. So everything is through your personal email, and also like, do not take calls where people can see you, because someone in my group did actually get terminated for going through that process. So be careful, be prudent about it, and actually start reaching out to firms themselves directly. At Goldman and a lot of other banks, we are fortunate. We'll get a lot of inbound emails from headhunters, and there's a handful of firms that you need to get to know. It's like HSP, Gold Coast, Henkel, like all these, like there's just like 6 or 7 firms that every PE firm uses, which we can share the list later. And they're pretty proactive about reaching out to you too. So a lot of the times with headhunters, it's not really you reaching out to them, but they'll reach out to you. And as I think Emma alluded to, you should talk to them when you're actually really ready, because that first impression will make or break your relationship with that headhunting firm. And so do a paper LBO and practice that. Practice talking through your resume. And that's really how I would begin the process. Like, figure out if it's something you really want to do, figure out which firms kind of meet your criteria. And then the headhunting list, like everyone knows the emails are actually all online, and you can just email them if they haven't reached out to you already.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we're gonna keep moving because we have a lot of questions to get to, but that was super helpful. Thank you. Maybe we'll go over to you, Nick, and then to Emma. How do you recommend? So let's, you build the list of firms you want to work at. You get in touch with headhunters. You start to get these interviews. What should you be ready for on day one in terms of technical case, other PE types of interviews?
Yeah, I think, from a technical perspective, obviously there's the behavioral segment, which, you'll get more of that with the headhunters at first, maybe some light touch technical stuff, but usually the first screen for technicals is going to be a paper LBO, right? And so you need to just know how LBOs work inside and out, be able to do it. A paper LBO, for those of you who are not familiar, is literally doing an LBO on a piece of paper in front of you, no, calculator. It's a bit of a mental math exercise as well. PE firms like to test that you have some threshold kind of, math ability and critical thinking there. But, that's like just practicing those on your own is kind of step one. The biggest piece for paper LBOs that you need to do is like practice them aloud to people. Half of technical interviews is knowing what to do. The other half is communicating it. And that's where you can really set yourself apart if you're able to communicate effectively, walk through it effectively, ask the right questions. As Sulekha mentioned, like a lot of times it's not about getting the right answer. It's being able to defend and communicate your answer in an effective way. There is not always a right or wrong answer. So, first step, paper LBOs. And then, practice doing actual model tests. There's some great online resources, and then you can talk with friends and like start from the basics and build more complex models. Just get it so that you can do it and do it quickly. A big piece of the case and kind of modeling tests, and every firm approaches this differently. It'll range from full-blown 3-statement model to like a short form model with, some PowerPoint slides, kind of pitching a thesis and risks of a deal, or it could just be that qualitative piece. Some firms don't do modeling tests anymore. So understanding what to prep for the right firms, and then just constant repetition. I find, trying to put yourself in that for case studies is trying to put yourself in that investor mindset. Like Sulekha said, like you see a company, you use a product, you're like, I wonder what the business model is like. What are the margins like of this business? Or pick a public company, study it, run an LBO, and then put together a few slides kind of pitching that investment. It's all about just repetition and putting yourself in the mindset. For people interviewing and recruiting for associate roles, you don't have the benefit of actually having worked, which all of us had, and it makes it way harder. The best way to prep is living and breathing like finance and transactions and business models every single day, and you're not going to have that. So you're going to have to try and get as close to that as possible through just consistent, prolonged prep. You can't leave technical prep to the end, whereas I think a lot of people in our position probably could prep later down the road because we were really prepping every day in our day jobs. So spend the time, get as many reps as you can, and work with someone, because speaking through and talking through these things is really half of the battle.
Yeah, that's great. Emma, anything else you'd add?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Nick. I think I just want to reiterate the point about that's why using a coach is fantastic. But truly, you really don't know what you don't know until you try to explain something to someone else and you're missing and there's gaps. And likewise, I think as much as you can individually try to put yourself in an investor mindset, it is helpful to have someone who's already been an investor kind of grill you on your deal experience. And very quickly, you'll be able to understand what people find the most interesting. So particularly with Leland, I think we can hopefully be helpful in reviewing your resume in addition and kind of asking you the types of questions that I would ask someone I was interviewing about their deal and just trying to get to like third and fourth level answers that make sense and hopefully will help prepare you for the recruiting process.
Yeah, that's great. By the way, I know a lot of you have already started reaching out to some of these coaches, but I think Erica dropped their profile links in the chat. Definitely get reps. Don't do this process alone. It's too important. Anything you're spending in coaching should be made up, 100 times if you can land an offer. So definitely don't do this alone. On that note, I wanted to just do one last plug. Make sure you enter the PE Bootcamp giveaway because we're going to give away a free slot in about 15 minutes. So I know there's like 100 of almost 200 of you that have already entered, but for the rest of you, make sure you enter. Just to give you like a quick overview of what the bootcamp is, it's really geared around like actually doing what we've been talking about, which is technical prep for folks that are trying to land the most competitive private equity offers. There's going to be 5 sessions, an hour and a half each. Most of them are geared around kind of like PE investment frameworks and then diving into actual modeling. So you can see, LBO modeling and valuation part 1 and 2. We're going to talk through PE deal structures, and then we're going to actually do a paper LBO together. And then in addition to that, you will get a personal one-on-one mock interview where you will do some of these skills and actually practice, and hopefully that can kind of kick you off on your prep. So I highly recommend you join us tonight. Only, as I mentioned, there's 20 slots that we're doing $1,000 off. You'll get that discount code when you enter the bootcamp giveaway. Just want to make sure, and reiterate that this is going to be super valuable, and make sure you don't do this alone. If you were to buy all this stuff like on your own, it would cost thousands of dollars, but we're pricing it. It's usually $2,000. We're pricing it at $1,000 tonight. Again, only the first 20 people that book at that price are going to get it, and then it'll go back up to the early bird price, which is a little bit more than that. So highly recommend you do that. We'll drop the link in the chat, and want to make sure. There's also a link that we'll send you where you can read a little bit more about it and get more of the details, but highly recommend you do that. Okay, let's go back to you, Sulekha, for this one. We've talked about this a little bit, but I think that it's important for people to understand, like, in a world of people that are coming from banking or consulting or other like common backgrounds, how can I spike? And as a part of that, like, are there common mistakes you see people make?
Yeah, I think I touched on this a bit before, but at least for me, the hook was really a strong, intense interest and also just understanding of the market and the environment, and specifically within healthcare, because that was my industry of recent PE deals that had taken place, and then coming up with a point of view on that and the ability to talk about that. Plus, like, actually pitching a company, which is a very common technique in hedge fund interviews, which I've also gone through in the past. But in PE, I would say there are fewer candidates that come to the table saying, hey, you should think about taking this $2 billion company private because of X, Y, and Z reasons, and this is sort of how I would think about it. I think that creates an interesting platform to have a discussion, because you're coming in with new information that the other side or the other party can react to and have an actual conversation about, versus, for example, I know a lot of people feel shy about going through recruiting because they don't have deal experience on their resume. I think this is a way to kind of accommodate for that and you know, make yourself seem sharp, because you can't obviously control your deal experience in banking a lot of the time, because you can't control when deals get done or not. So this is a way for you to kind of take control of your interview experience and bring something to the table that you can actually talk about, especially if you run an LBO on it, because with public companies, you have all the information out there, and every model test you'll do, if they put you through a model test, they will generally give you a public company and a ticker and a 10K and ask you to build the model. And so it's a good rep just to go through that anyways. In terms of common mistakes, I think this also kind of goes to what I was saying earlier about just getting into the PE recruiting process simply because everyone else is doing it. I think it shows pretty quickly whether or not you really want to do this job. And it shows in the kind of way you show up in interviews. I think being too anxious or too aggressive is a pretty big turnoff in interviews in general, because we do work in pretty high pressure environments. As Emma alluded to, and Nick as well, like we're looking for people who are great people to work with and just good human beings. And so when you're too focused on proving yourself or too focused on demonstrating your accolades, etc., a lot of the times the focus goes away from humility and becomes more kind of braggy in nature. And ultimately, like when you're working 80 hours sometimes on live deals with each other, you just want a really good person to be there by your side on your team doing this. And ultimately, personality, I think a lot of the times weighs out more than any deal experience would, because you would rather be with a great person and help them along the way versus someone who's excellent but really not very good to work with. And so remembering that humility is an important element throughout all of this, and also just being like yourself and being a good person and having a good attitude, because like times will be difficult, and if you're a good person and show a great attitude, it makes it a lot easier to get through those tough times.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to keep moving because we have a few more questions we want to get to. And I know there are some questions coming through in the chat. We'll try to get to them if we can in the chat or at the end if we have some extra time. So thank you for asking those. So I guess the maybe one question around navigating kind of offers and interviews. I'll open it up to any of you three that feel passionate about. I know you talked about this a little bit in some of your intros, but how to think about actually making the decision and how to not cross the line of kind of gathering too many offers before you make the decision and upsetting some of the firms you've been building relationships with. How to set those expectations would be super helpful.
I'm happy to chat about this. I mean, I don't have this experience firsthand, but have seen a lot of. I've been texting with a lot of people the last 24 hours and trying to coach them through this. A lot of times there's kind of a forcing function, right? There's going to be some time component to your offer, some exploding offer. You know, as other people have mentioned, people will try to keep you in their office so that you don't go interview with other people. But really, this is why it's so important to know what you want beforehand. Stack rank things. If you know that you are going to be unhappy or disappointed with an offer, you know, there's a question of whether you should be interviewing there at all, right? Don't put yourself in a position where if you get an offer, you will not take it, right? Or you will be disappointed if you have to take it. Because oftentimes what will happen is if you do get that offer and you don't get other offers, you decide not to take it and go back to off cycle, right? That can damage your reputation with headhunters. That can hurt you know, your standing with people. And so I would say don't put yourself in a position where you're going to get an offer that you will never accept. And so do your work beforehand. But most often, you know, it comes down to your preferences and how you kind of feel and vibe with the team that you've been interviewing with.
Yeah, that's great. We'll talk to maybe I would go to you, Emma, and just kind of get your thoughts on, like, as you've kind of helped people since your own process, how do you recommend they prepare? I know you talked a lot about your own personal experience prepping.
Yeah.
Someone making an announcement.
Oh yeah. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. So I guess so we've already touched on some of it. Like Nick had mentioned earlier, I actually do a lot of paper LBOs with people as a starting point, just to kind of see where they're at. I think a lot of the modeling piece can actually be done independently, and I'm always happy as a coach to review and kind of talk about any questions that are coming up about specifics. But I think where we can be especially valuable, at least in my perspective, is kind of going over your deals and trying to really dig into what the rationale was, kind of hone your perspective on why it was a good transaction, why it was too expensive, why you think it'll be like a knockout deal for that firm. Whatever the rationale is, I think you can really benefit from an investor perspective, kind of digging at that. And at least for me, a lot of my technical questions, once I passed the model test, were just purely around deal experience. I think it depends. I think if you show earlier on, you might be weaker on some of the more rote, like cash flow, net income to EBITDA questions. Perhaps you get more of those. But if you're pretty strong on that and strong on the model, what you might find is just purely deal questions thereafter. So at least for me as a coach, I think it's really, really important to make sure my clients are really strong and can actually articulate what they did, what their responsibilities were, and kind of what the deal means in a larger sense. Because if not, I think it's pretty easy as an interviewer to say, wow, like, obviously it's understandable, you know, you work a lot in banking, but did this person even register what was going on around them? And do they actually have a perspective that could add value at my firm? So for me, that's one of the most important skills to kind of refine. And I'm going to drop, but thank you guys so much. And
thanks for joining, Emma. I appreciate you joining before your flight. Super helpful.
bye.
Take care. Maybe one question I'll open up that's coming through in the chat at a couple times. How to think about this process if you aren't necessarily a traditional candidate? Is it sort of like you got to go back to the drawing board and go get into banking or something else? Is it build the skills and try to get exposure in some other way? Is it recruit for maybe a non-top tier PE shop? Curious if either of you have thoughts or for folks that are maybe coming from a non-traditional role.
I'll be honest, I did come from a very traditional background. I mean, working at Goldman and then going to PE and then going to business school after. And so I do appreciate and empathize that it is more difficult to come from a non-traditional background. I would say what helps is if you modify and kind of go to geographies, which candidates from New York don't necessarily want to go to, or candidates from San Francisco don't necessarily want to go to. So I have friends who were working in asset management who got into private equity in Texas, for example, because it was a small shop that a traditional kind of banking 2-year analyst candidate would not perhaps want to recruit for right off the bat. And so I think those are really the ways in which it becomes a little bit more feasible and practical to get into a buy-side type role. But it's also important to know that you want to be sure that you have a skill set. So let's say you even get through the interview process and you get like the offer and you start. You don't want to show up and not have the appropriate skills that they would expect of you as a first-year associate in private equity. And so while the aspiration might be great to land in a buy-side role, it's also important for the skills to kind of catch up with that. And so that could be doing a program with us and getting coached and trained to make sure your technical skill set is up to snuff. I mean, the reason why these programs feed into private equity is because basically the banks or the consulting firms help with the training component of it so that you hit the ground running when you get to your associate seat. And so I would say, like, it's not impossible by any means, but it is very much easier if you sort of go after roles or firms that maybe a traditional candidate is not necessarily seeking right off the bat. So that could be helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Nick, anything you'd add on just general, like what's the kind of the playbook? I know you've been coaching a lot on Leland lately. What's kind of the playbook you typically follow?
Yeah. I think it is, I think, very tough to come from a non-banking, non-consulting right into private equity. Especially, in those geographies that Sulekha was mentioning. I think there are opportunities at kind of lower middle market regional firms that you could try and break into. But finding kind of your stepping stones and being like, okay, if you're in, I saw in the chat, like FP&A, like how do I get into maybe some sort of banking role? And then from there, maybe it's business school, and then you can try to, go from business school into an investment firm. It's just very hard. And so you need to get creative and you need to kind of open and widen your lens a bit, I think, in terms of how you would approach recruiting and kind of the job search.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we're gonna just kind of move to last question here. So like we'll come back to you. Any final tips? We've covered a lot. I know it's impossible to cover everything, and we've given you guys a lot to think about and do, but there is still a lot of work ahead. But any final tips you have for folks that are recruiting into private equity that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think at times, and I was very much in this mindset too when I was going through the on-cycle recruiting, you feel like it's the end of the world, like if it doesn't all shake out the way you want it to. But I think perspective is super important, especially now that I'm kind of 10 years post-grad almost. It's life is very long, careers are very long. And what's interesting is if I survey people in my analyst class who went into private equity after, the number of people that are still in private equity, I would say, is probably less than 20%. And so even us, like even me, I like I thought I was going to be a lifelong investor, but then I found something that I thought was even more interesting and exciting from an intellectual standpoint, from a financial standpoint, et cetera, that was exciting for me to go and pursue. And so keeping an open mind and realizing there's no finality in any of this, like just because you didn't get that Blackstone offer this time, like don't beat yourself up. Like Blackstone will always be hiring, even down to like MD level. At some point, they might want you back. But to be fair, there's so many great opportunities out there, especially nowadays, because I think tech is even as competitive or lucrative as a career in professional financial services or investing. And so basically all I'm trying to say is don't freak out and get scared, and there's support along the way and encouragement, and there's a community here, and don't think that you're less than for any reason because you didn't get that offer. But certainly we can work to kind of develop that skill set to make sure that you're resilient and get the right offer for you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Nick, anything else you'd add?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Sulekha was saying real quick, it's a numbers game, right? There's a huge luck component to this too, right? You could perform the same in 3 different interviews, and 2 of them will say, "Oh, not a good fit," and the third one will love you, right? So, you got to take shots on goal. You gotta be prepared, but also be prepared to be flexible. My biggest piece of advice is figure out what you want to do. If this is what you want to do, then kind of throw everything you have at it. And ultimately, you know, I mentioned this earlier, like just be yourself. Far too often when I've been interviewing and sitting in like the room making hiring decisions for associates, you know, the commentary of this candidate crushed it. He was great. She did perfect on this part, but everything they said sounded scripted, right? It is very easy to be scripted. And it is so easy to be able to tell when someone is scripted. And so what I tell people I coach is like those core behavioral questions, you know, what's your story? Why PE? Like memorize them to the point that they're just ingrained in you and they're no longer memorized. And you're like actually, you know, speaking as if you're speaking to a normal human being. So just be yourself, prep as hard as you can, and figure out what you want. That's what I would say.
I love it. This is great. Okay, we will announce. Well, first of all, can we show some love in the chat for these 3 panelists? Thank you guys so much for being here. We'll get I'm going to pull the boot camp winner here in just a second. They just messaged it to me. But yeah, huge thank you guys. This was awesome. Very, very helpful and informative. Okay, the giveaway winner is Cameron M. Cameron, we'll shoot you a note. We have your email. We're excited to have you. And yeah, thanks for yeah, there we go. Congrats, Cameron. And hopefully we see many more of you. Thank you guys for coloring on the screen. Very helpful. And let me delete these annotations. If you have questions about coaching or the bootcamp or anything, feel free to reach out to us. We do have a team that's texting some of you about bootcamp questions, and we'll be available tonight. You can set up a strategy call with our team. We'll drop our link in the chat so you can do that. We just really appreciate all these coloring. You guys are such good artists here on the screen here. All right, there we go. Clear all drawings. Thank you guys for being here. What a great event. And yeah, good luck with everything. We're rooting for you and hope to see you again on a future Leland event. And reminder, the discount code ends tonight if you want to take advantage of that. So yeah, make sure you do that. All right, guys. Sulekha, Nick,